Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. I am very happy to be talking again to our good friend John Ondrasik, 5 for Fighting, 5forfighting.com, who has just come back from a trip to Israel. He was performing in Israel on the night that Iran launched its missile attack on Israel, and he's been doing media about this. He's been on social media about this, and now he's joining us to talk about his experiences. John, first off, always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Always a pleasure, Ed. Thanks for having me.
So, it was an interesting, you sent me a couple of pictures from this. At first, I didn't quite grasp what was going on. It was a little confusing. And you had to kind of explain to me what the significance of what was in the picture. But let's talk about the Iranian missile attack first. You're there, you're performing to raise awareness about the hostages, because, it's the people that's, close to your heart here. And you're there, and all of a sudden you're in the biggest attack on Israel since really the 6-day war. Or since October 7th, but in terms of military attack, really, that's the biggest attack since the 6-day war. And what was that like?
It was scary, it was surreal. It was particularly unnerving because I had my son with me, and my wife did not want him to go to Israel. And then, of course, she was very concerned and in tears. And yeah, to be honest with you, when the drones launched, we were like, okay. But when the ballistic missiles take, 12 minutes to get to Tel Aviv. So of course you're concerned, thank goodness for the Iron Dome, but it was surreal. I mean, I went to Israel to meet with some of the hostage families, play for the troops, meet with some Israeli artists on some future projects, and kind of just show some support from, a non-Jewish American. But yeah, I'd never heard an announcement before my gig like this, Ed. The announcements before the Hostage Square performance was, in the event of missile attack, everybody please take cover, lay on the ground, put your hands over your head. And then same thing was, nobody left. There are thousands of people there. And that's really what I learned about the Israeli people. They're kind of used to this. They're not kind of like us. They're like, okay, yeah, it's been a couple thousand years. We're used to this. And nobody left. And then after my performance at Hostage Square, the person that runs the hostage forum said, hey, it's they're closing the airspace. You need to be in your hotel by 11 o'clock. You need to be by a safe room. And it was like 8:30. And my first thought was, why not now? Why wait till 11 o'clock? What's happening at 11 o'clock? And it got even more surreal. I was with an entourage of Israeli folks, and I said, you guys, you heard we have to be in our hotel. And they're like, yeah, we know. I'm like, well, let's go. And they're like, but we have a dinner reservation. And I'm like, ha, 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 you're funny. They're like, no, we waited 2 weeks for this dinner reservation. I'm like, you guys are crazy. But that's kind of their attitude. But yeah, so, we finally got everybody back to the hotel. We scoped out the safe room. Of course, I'm on Twitter. They're at the bar. And at 11 o'clock, the drones were launched. And it was a very long night, of course. A lot of people were concerned. I ended up going on Fox News because what else am I going to do at 3 a.m. To kind of report from Israel, do my best Trey Inkst. But yeah, it was very unnerving. It was scary. It certainly reminded me of when I was in Ukraine, Of course, Ukraine did not have the Iron Dome, so that was probably much more dangerous.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that was it similar to when you were in Ukraine, and draw the same distinction? And the other distinction is it wasn't just the Iron Dome. You had the US, the UK, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia up there shooting these things down, which is a statement in and of itself, which you don't have in Ukraine. We're giving Ukraine materials, but Ukraine's the only people fighting there. So, what are the similarities? What are the differences, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Oh, again, when you're in Ukraine, you run into the subways or you run into the basement. There is no Iron Dome. There is no, collaboration of nations shooting down drones. Um, uh, so it's,
Yeah.
people are trying to kill you. To be honest with you, when the time I really understood what was happening is when we started seeing the intercepts over Jerusalem, because if Iran's firing on Jerusalem, they're definitely firing at civilian targets. So, the initial reports were, well, they're going to fire at military targets. So as soon as you see the intercepts over Jerusalem, they're trying to kill thousands of people. So, so I think whenever you're kind of in those situations, it's unnerving. On the other hand, you have confidence that the odds are with you. But yeah, it's, um, the Israeli people, as I said, that was also something that kind of lifted me up, was their kind of fortitude and their will. But it's very similar to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have the same fortitude because they remember being under the yoke of the Soviet Union. So, they understand, they appreciate freedom. So both of those people share that kind of, courage and fortitude and kind of willingness to just keep living life, even under these circumstances.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I've been in Israel a few times, a couple times for work and a couple times on pilgrimages, right? And the Israelis are, there is an old word in the English language that nobody uses anymore. I think the last time it was even applied was probably World War II to the British, which is dowdy, right? Doughty. People who are just robustly brave in ordinary circumstances and extraordinary circumstances. And the Israelis have always struck me that way. They're joyous. They enjoy life. They celebrate. They do all sorts of different things, but they're always ready. And the first time I was there, I'll tell you this quick story and just try to see if you had any sort of similar experiences there. I was at a conference. I was at what was called the presidential conference that Shimon Peres used to put on. And one of the friends I'd made there realized I hadn't been out of the hotel, and he took me on a tour of the old city. And this is late at night. And we're going through one of the checkpoints, and there is a platoon, I guess, of brand new graduates from boot camp, I guess it was. And these are all, not teenagers, or maybe some of them were teenagers, but they're all armed to the teeth too, and they're having a great time. They're eating food and all this. And my friend says, "Why don't you grab yourself some food?" And I said, "I'm not going to grab food out of the out of the hands of a bunch of really heavily armed people. I'm fine." Thank you very much. But I mean, but they're enjoying it. It was down at the Western Wall where this was taking place. It was the checkpoint to get into there, and yeah, I mean, so it doesn't surprise me to hear that they still wanted to keep the reservation, even though missiles were coming at them, because they understand, you have to, the only way to win is to live your life boldly in a place like Israel. And so, I mean, I think you and I have had similar experiences with the Israelis.
Yeah, I mean, you walk down the street in a big marketplace in Jerusalem and it's packed, and you see, 4 18-year-old girls in full army uniform with AK-47s, right? You don't see that in America. You don't see that in the Western world. And you understand, you walk by restaurants that have little plaques because there was a suicide bomber that killed people there. Yep. But at the same time, you walk through the Arab quarter, right? You walk through, you walk through many of the Arab cities and places, and it's incredibly beautiful, and people are happy, and people are working, and people are at restaurants, and I think it's not a good talking point to remind people there's 2 million Arabs living in Israel. None of them are protesting. None of them are rioting on campuses because they know they got it pretty good. Certainly, there's tension, of course, when you are in Jerusalem, and I was there at the wall when the call to prayers went out, and many Muslims were coming down, and some people give you a little look, but that's the kind of amazing thing of Israel, that there is this coexistence there with some tensions, and everybody's kind of on alert, but at the same time, this missile attack was expected for days, and the beaches were packed, the restaurants were packed. You know, literally the day after the missile, the Sunday morning, I looked out at the beaches and I'm like, oh, there's nobody, nobody's here. Everybody's still hiding in their houses. My friend's like, no, man, it's, Sundays are Monday. Everybody's at work. So that everybody was at work. And
Yeah.
so it's almost, certainly there are people that are nervous. And I talked to, many people there, many experts. I talked to Michael Oren. I talked to Natan Sharansky. I talked to the former Israeli governor of Gaza, of Gaza, 20 years ago.
Right.
And they all have predictions about what was going to happen. None of them said Iran's going to fire 300 missiles. None of them expected that. So I do think, even though we talk about, Israel and certainly they're very good at many things and sometimes the best in the world at things, you still can't understand how October 7th happened. You can't understand how it took 8 hours for soldiers to get to some of these, border towns. And that's the just thing that blows your mind. You see how smart they are. You see how their intelligence is. We only got out because we were on the Israeli airlines. Everybody else canceled their all the other carriers canceled their flights. So you just can't put it together of like, how did this October 7th happen? And I think once this war is over, there's going to be a lot of looking into that. I'm sure there already is.
Well, I'm sure there is. There's going to be accountability, and everybody knows that they're just waiting for the active war phase to be over before that happens. Let's talk about the hostage families, because it's a almost something we don't discuss here, and I'm mystified by it, because we have I think 5 or 6 Americans, that have dual citizenship, but they're American citizens that Hamas is holding, and nobody in the media covers that here, unless you have, the hostage video that came out last week, for instance. It was one of the American hostages that Hamas featured there very clearly, to tweak both the US and Israel and to try to manipulate them into withdrawing. But we can talk about, cold, hard calculations being necessary here. But I mean, the hostage families, they have a real interest in this. And I know that they're very active, right? And you were doing, that was what you were doing there is this event on behalf of the hostage families. What are they saying to you? And I know that they're unhappy with the way that the government's handling this, but are they frustrated by other things? Or I'm sure it's complicated. I just don't know what to think.
With my songs, I've had many experiences where I've talked to people that have suffered terrible things.
Yeah.
I've never had anything close to the conversations with the hostage families. Listening to the stories of the fathers, people say there are no words. There are no words. The agony to look into their eyes every second of every day. They wonder what is happening to my child, to my father, to my brother, to my sister. They know that the stories from the hostages that were released, that people were sexually abused, tortured, starved. So they know what's ever happening is terrible. They're desperate, of course. They say they just try to wake up every day. There is kind of a split within the hostage families. Some are very understandably angry at Netanyahu and they're protesting in the streets. Others understand, what can we do? Israel keeps offering stuff and Hamas turns them down. I think Hamas has no interest in releasing the hostages because it's worked for them and continues to work for them. But what you said about America and the media not talking about the hostages, it goes to my song, We're Not Okay. Yeah. Something's deeply broken in this country. We see every day on our campuses. We see it in the media, common sense things. We see it that nobody in the arts is speaking up, just to call out Hamas as evil. We're deeply broken. Now, that's the media. That's our college campuses. That's the arts. But if you look at America. And this is one thing I told the hostage families. I told many people there, I said, look, don't just look what's happening on television. Don't look at the college campuses only. Don't look at the media. Don't look at the BBC. Don't look at the AP. Don't look at the people that basically are Hamas sympathizers. Don't look at the UN. The vast majority of Americans support Israel. And you see that in the polls. You know, one came out yesterday, 80% support Israel.
I have a post coming up about that. In fact, by the time it'll already have been up by the time we post this interview. But yeah, and that hasn't changed. I mean, nothing on that has changed. It's exactly the same as it was 2 months ago and 3 months ago.
And as you said, and I'm sure you'll say, you know, most of those, over 70%, believe Israel should go into Rafah and take out Hamas. So nobody wants to talk about that. And I think that's one of my missions, is let people understand that, and let people understand that from people who are not Jewish. One reason I think I was so appreciated going there is that I'm not Jewish. I'm just sane. And I care about Ukrainian children. I care about Israeli children. I care about Afghan children. I care about Palestinian children the same. And you know, and the only way, you know, that's why I shrug my shoulders at the ceasefire crowds and the rabid maniacs on campuses and the faculty who claim to care about Palestinians. They don't. They have no interest in the well-being of Palestinians. If they did, they would be protesting Hamas, you know, for using kids as human shields, for taking hostages, for their atrocities. For basically, if you speak up, if there is a protest at a college in Gaza, you're all dead. They will kill you. So that's what I think, you know, people don't understand in Israel. So I think that's one of my missions. But yeah, it's a disgrace. And if there was any other, look, if there were 5 Muslim hostages, American Muslim hostages somewhere in the world, it would be on every channel 24/7. AOC would be screaming at the White House. So it's, you know, I think it's a good education of where we are. And also, you know, there's a lot of reasons for this, but anti-Semitism is definitely at the base of it. And I don't think we should ignore that.
Well, very clearly, anti-Semitism is one thing. And I think that the systems of wokery are designed around that, right? They're designed to produce that. That's what intersectionality does, is it highlights and denigrates the Jews. Eventually, that's the way that system works. And you're seeing that on these college campuses. But there's something else in play here too, which is that the people who are on these college campuses are basically Marxists who are trying to push the revolution, right? And you know, my friend Adam, you know Adam Baldwin.
Oh, sure. Love Adam.
Yeah, Adam's great. And he keeps reminding me of this every time we start talking about something like this. And we just got done doing this in one of the previous episodes. He always reminds me, the issue is not the issue. Just remember that the issue is not the issue. And so in a sense, I mean, what's happening on these college campuses is an exploitation of both the Palestinians and the Israelis for something completely different, which is just the deconstruction of Western civilization and an imposition of a Marxist state. And that's really, to some extent, obscene, considering the circumstances.
You're exactly right. I talked to Sharansky, and he said the same thing. He said 20 years ago, he was asked, what is the biggest threat to Western civilization? And he said American academia, which has proven to be true. Yep. And he said, obviously, with his imprisonment in the Soviet Union and what he went through, he said he's seen all these drills before, and it is pure Marxism. And I didn't really understand the depth of that till talking to him and listening to folks like you and your stuff. And that's what it is at the end of the day. And that's what I say in my, talks about my song. A lot of people say, oh, it's pro-Israel or it's, anti-Palestinian. I'm like, no, it's pro-civilization against those who want to tear it down. I put in the video Putin right next to Iran, next to Hamas, next to the UN, because there's no bigger cheerleader for Hamas than the UN. So yeah, it's a deep rot. I think America's been very slow to awaken to it, talking about being woke. I think if there's anything, I hate to say positive, but there's anything clarifying about what's happened since October 7th, we see the rot on our college campuses. We see the infection that the wokeness has has infiltrated into all aspects of our society. Because, I think 20 years ago, we knew that our college campuses were kind of rampant with this ideology, but I think many of us were naive. We thought, well, those kids are going to have to grow up. They're going to have to get a job. They're going to have families. They're going to, they're going to understand that that doesn't work in the real world. That didn't happen. What happened is those indoctrinated kids 10, 15 years ago are now running Columbia. They're running the New York Times. Many of them are running tech companies. Many of them are running huge media companies. So that is the fight we're fighting. We're fighting that. And I think we're losing that. And one reason we're losing is because we've lost the arts. And we've lost the arts because of some of the woke indoctrination, but we've also lost the arts because of the cowardice of many of the artists who claim to speak for human rights.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this in relation to Ukraine as well, but I mean, it's very clear here that Hollywood and the music industry is ducking this thing almost entirely, and to the extent that they say anything at all, it's usually to echo what's happening on the college campuses. There have been some exceptions to this. I mean, Michael Rappaport, who's a character actor who's been in stuff that people will have seen. They may not know his name, but they'd recognize his face and his voice, has been extremely outspoken
Yes.
about Hollywood's cowardice, right? You're extremely outspoken about the cowardice in the music industry. I mean, even just the fact that you were playing in Israel, right? During this conflict, that had to have gotten you at least some pushback or some cautionary notes. I'm not aware that anybody's really doing that in Israel these days, or certainly none of the people that would command arenas these days. The Taylor Swifts aren't doing that. The Beyoncés aren't doing that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, frankly, there's been a better showing in Hollywood. Deborah Messing, David Schwimmer,
Yes.
Mia Bialik. So at least Hollywood, you see a very small subset. In the music industry, virtually nothing. There's a guy named David Draymond who's a rock singer for Disturbed, who's Jewish, and he's been outspoken. What's shocking is how many Jewish artists have remained quiet or joined the ceasefire crowd. But yeah, it's a historical disgrace. There was a little piece in the Wall Street Journal for me last weekend that mentioned some of the stuff I was doing, and I heard that rankled some folks in the music industry that basically, it mentioned the fact that they're quiet, they're shameful, they're on the wrong side of history, and they didn't like that. But if the shoe fits, baby, it's like sorry, they're going to have to answer for this one day, and there's no good answer. So all I can do is what I can do. I'm trying to do some larger projects, some more international projects. There were some Ukrainian folks with me in Israel. The Ukrainians are certainly are looking to Israel, and Israel looking to Ukraine to support each other. But it's not just that. There's the Iranian dissidents. The musicians who are jailed. We're still rescuing people from Afghanistan. 2.5 years later, we still have people girls in Pakistan. So all this stuff's connected. I fear Taiwan's the next domino to fall, especially considering the election coming and how distracted everybody is. But all we can do is the right thing. And I think we all have a role. You have a role to play. I have a role to play. And I think people that are watching this, I think it's really important that you don't stand on the sidelines. And it could be at your school PTA. It could be in a meeting. It could be donating to a cause. It could be just around a dinner table when you're intimidated and somebody's calling Israel genocidist, to stop and say, you know what, man, I'm going to push back at you on that because the consequences are too high. If you have kids at these schools, if my kid was out there protesting and doing this insane stuff, they would be home right now. They would be pulled out of that school. Where are all these parents of these, brainwashed maniac kids at UCLA and Columbia? Where are the parents? So I think we all have a role to play to do the right thing. And it's going to be a long fight, but it's a good fight.
I got to ask you one question about because that sounds like a good wrap up point. But I want to go back to the concert in Tel Aviv that you were doing the night that the missiles came in, and this is almost going to sound like, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? And I just I know, the big thing was that, well, the missiles got shot, where you were standing. That's kind of the big thing. But I want to ask you, what else happened at this concert? How were people reacting? And what did you take away from that concert in Tel Aviv?
The only thing I can compare it to is when I played the concert for New York, to sing a song and look out at a crowd of people suffering and sing a song with them, and literally having parents 10 feet from me holding the signs of their loved one, looking at me in the eye and singing with me. And you feel a deep sense of sadness, but you also feel a sense of satisfaction that you are doing something to help them in some way, singing, being together, American, non-Jewish, some of the words I said, you're seeing that to them, you're making a difference and you're giving them hope and strength. So, so that was very powerful to me, and I'll take that to my grave. I hope, I said this after 9/11, after the concert for New York, I hope I never have to play a concert like this again. I never expected I would, but I did. And I hope there'll never be another one. But it was incredibly powerful. When I walked off stage, I was just kind of hugged by, dozens of hostage families, and they just need those hugs. They need to feel that they're not alone.
Right.
So that for me was worth any missile attack. So glad it happened.
Well, I'm glad you were there, and you're one of the bravest men I know, and I know you're gonna. I knew you were gonna scoff at that. I really did know that you were gonna scoff at that, but you really are. And you go to places where it's not just the fact that you're going to places where there's actual danger, right? Like Ukraine and Israel in the middle of an Iranian missile attack, because that's clearly actual danger. But you go to places where people are hurting.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's not dangerous. It's just hard. And I think in this country, we've lost a lot of our ability to do what's hard. And I think that that's one of the things that makes you so valuable in your industry and out of it, John. And I have a ton of admiration for you. I know we're friends, but I have a ton of admiration for you. And I think that that's really what we're talking about here, is having the guts to stand up, do something right, and to connect to people who are hurting because a great deal of injustice has been done to them. And you do that over and over and over again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, John Ondrasik, 5forfighting.com. It's on the screen behind me because I couldn't find my logo. Technical difficulties, but I like having that on my screen behind me too. So 5forfighting.com is where you got to go. What's coming up for you next?
Yeah, just got off the road, so kind of recovering. I'm going to do some things at college campuses to push back and support stuff.
Really?
Yeah,
so that's interesting.
Yeah, we'll work on that, and I think we have to go on offense and really support some of the Jewish the kids and faculty. So we still got a lot to do. Just working on some projects. I'll be in Texas doing a couple shows later this year, so I'll look you up and let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bricked the last time. I couldn't make it to the Texas. I couldn't make it, and I felt really bad about that. But yeah,
we're in Florida at the end of the month doing some rock shows, so everybody in Florida and Atlanta come out and see us. But and we'll be on the road all summer. So I love seeing everybody, and all the tour dates are at 5forfighting.com. So it'll be fun to play and get out with the guys again, and yeah, we'll just keep fighting the good fight, and everybody, we're on the same page. So let's keep let's do this together.
Amen, brother. 5forfighting.com, a name that means what it says. And Ondrasik, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Ed.